Great. Well, okay, so welcome everybody. This is the Waste No More Task Force, and this is our second meeting. It's really, really nice to have everyone here. I know a couple of you had to miss the first meeting, so it's great to have you, and we'll do a round of introductions so you can see who's here and introduce yourselves. So I think, yeah, go ahead. Oh. So I think just first a reminder that the focus of this meeting, this is like, we're really getting into the heart of what this task force is doing. We are going to be focusing on the rollout timeline itself as a whole, and how, you know, the ordinance, the Waste No More ordinance, was passed by the voters, and there are some tweaks that need to happen to the timeline, in part just to make it current. But we're going to be talking about that at a high level today, and we're going to be spending a lot of time hearing from all of you in small groups and in the full group. So that's the overall purpose for today. What I'd love to do is, before we get into the agenda and delve into the meeting, just go around and do a round of introductions, first of the task force members, and then we'll have the city staff who are here introduce themselves. So my name is Ryan Golton, and I'm a facilitator with CBI. And maybe I'll let Sophia, who also works with CBI, introduce herself, and then we'll go to the task force.
Hi everyone, Sofia Cuenca Aguirre, also a facilitator with CBI and assisting Ryan throughout this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Well, how about this? I'm just going to go around my screen, and Councilman Clark, you happen to be at the top of my screen, so I'm going to have you go first. I'm looking to see if Councilman Hines is on here as well. And can anyone tell me that? Because I'm not seeing it.
I don't see him on yet.
I'm not seeing him either.
Okay, so Councilman Clark, go ahead, and then we'll go to Chris Chiari, and then we'll go to Lori Johnson.
Hi, everybody. Joel Clark. I am on the Denver City Council, at least until July, and then I'm not. But for now, I am. So thanks for having me.
And you know what? I forgot to say one thing that I would love for each of you to say when you introduce yourselves is one hopeful thing in your personal or professional life that you have seen to reduce landfill waste or lead to sustainability in your neighborhood or home or community. One thing. So Councilman Clark, I didn't give you any notice, but do you want to say it? Do you have anything on the top of your mind, or should I go to Chris?
I can jump right in. I am inspired by my teenagers because I have two high schoolers, and I always worry, what is the next generation going to take on, and how are they going to be, and just seeing how much they care about what goes in what bin, and when they catch anybody putting stuff in the wrong place gives me a lot of hope for where we're headed. To see teenagers really sometimes seems like they don't care about anything in the world except for what's going on inside here. But they
the father of teenagers. I relate. Thank you. Chris, go ahead, and then Lori.
Hi, Chris Chiari, under the Patterson Inn, here representing small businesses. Thanks for springing that question right there, but I would point across the street where the community came together to start Xeriscape here in the neighborhood, showing the way for what we can do around water conservation here across the city. And as it applies to this, it makes me think of what type of community solutions might exist in neighborhoods and backyards when it comes to composting.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Lori Johnson, Circular Colorado. I'm going to use this to give you guys some good news. So we won the contract to administer the new Circular Economy Development Center. And so that's super inspiring, because we are going to stand up some end markets to take these materials that we are all trying to collect. So look for that coming the 1st of July.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so Erwin Galvan, you're next, and then Peggy Panzer, and then Christopher Berry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erwin Galvan. I'm with Waste Management. I'm the district manager for the Denver 48th Avenue MRF here in Denver, as well as the Colorado Springs MRF in Colorado Springs. One hopeful thing, improvement. I see that there's a lot of people that are interested in recycling and doing well for the environment, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of things that we can do better, and I'm hoping that this task force helps in that way.
Thanks, Erwin. And we can't, I assume you know we can't see your video, but we can hear you loud and clear. Thanks. Okay, Peggy and then Chris. Oh, Peggy, you're on mute. You want to, oh, there you go.
Yeah, you would think that I'd be really good at this by now, but it's a learning curve, right? It's only been 2 years. Peggy Panzer here with Larimar Group. I'm in the apartment industry and have been for a number of decades. I'm very active with the Apartment Association. So really, I'm hoping to be the voice for 700,000 apartment dwellers in the Denver and surrounding areas. And as far as recycling and waste and doing my little part, didn't know that question was coming up either. So I have something that's a small impact, but I also believe if everyone makes a small impact, it's a big impact. I run every single day, and I never fail to see empty water bottles, cans, you name it, soft drink cans on the side, and I bring them back with me as I'm returning, and I come back with handfuls of things that I then recycle personally from what I picked up on my run.
Thank you. Christopher Berry, and then Renee Ortiz, and then Ryan Call.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Berry. I'm the Government Contracts Manager with GFL Environmental. You know, I'm inspired and hopeful by the talent of the group assembled here. This is a gathering of big brains of public, private, nonprofit, residents. If we come together to really put a good effort forward, I think we can do a good job.
Thank you, Chris. Renee, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Renee Ortiz with Eventful Productions, and I'm helping to represent the special events industry through this conversation. And I am inspired by the work that's happening on this task force and having that, in-depth conversation that touches so many different aspects. And so I feel like this is a great step forward.
Thank you. Ryan, go ahead. And then we'll go to JW, Anna, and Stephen.
Hey everyone, Ryan Call with EcoCycle here. Really quick, I want to show off my Waste No More campaign t-shirt. I've knocked on hundreds of doors with this t-shirt. And what makes me inspired and hopeful are my coworkers that I get to work with every day. They have introduced 2 bills to the state legislature to improve composting, not just in Denver, but statewide. So they inspire me every day.
Thank you. JW, there you go.
Hello, everyone. My name is JW Hauser. I'm an area construction manager with Taylor Morrison. We're a local home builder. And I think the inspiring thing for me would be to find a way to stop some of this waste before it becomes waste, to get in front of it before it's a problem that goes to the landfill or has to be recycled, how we can kind of catch it on the front side before it's a problem that everyone else has to deal with.
Thank you. Anna and Stephen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Perks, owner and founder of Perks Deconstruction. We offer deconstruction services around the Front Range. And what keeps me inspired is today I got to host a group of architecture students at one of our job sites. We're removing the roof, and they were able to see about 5,000 pounds of lumber that we saved from the deconstruction part of it, and a big pile of scrap metal, and getting architects and designers thinking about how to design for the future and to design for deconstruction, and so that buildings are easily readapted and dismantled for reuse. So that keeps me really excited.
Thank you so much. Stephen.
So I'm Stephen Shepard, and I am the Executive Vice President, Chief Staff Officer for the Building Owners and Managers Association. And so my members own and run commercial real estate. So we partner a lot with Peggy's group on the multifamily because we don't do residential. So that's where the commercials kind of collide right there between the two of us. So my great excitement, I guess, is I think every day I keep hearing from one of our emerging professionals about things that they're trying to do with their building around recycling, to try to implement composting or this, that, or the other at their building. And so it's great to see that even though we've had buildings in Denver recycling for 20 years, it's great to see the next generation picking up the baton and seeing what they can do with it.
Yeah, that is hopeful. Thank you. Okay, how about Clinton, then Josh Jackson, and then Sonia Riggs?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Clinton Sander. I work for A1 Organics. I represent the large commercial compost manufacturer for the group here, A1. You know, we process over 500,000 tons of organics annually. It's right behind me back there, some of it. What I've been finding really encouraging and I think is amazing, not only Denver focusing efforts on getting organics out of the landfill, but also on a state level and also on a national level, the amount of attention that is coming on how valuable these materials are. And then the second part of that would be community. I've had a lot of great, amazing conversations in the last couple of weeks with the changes and like the amount of support and the amount of the community coming out to learn more, to better understand what's going on is amazing. So I just really love that. So thank you.
Thanks, Clinton. Josh.
Yes, I'm Josh Jackson. I'm with the Rocky Mountain NAACP State Conference. I'm criminal justice chair there, as well as some environmental things that we have happening there. I'm also with the Urban League Young Professionals on their executive board, Denver Basic Income Project. I'm the chairman of the board at Metro Deep, economic organization here in Denver, with Community Works and One Main Street, Colorado as well. I come from a very unique perspective. I'm here to represent community in this. I'm here to make sure that communities is thought about, involved in conversation, to make sure that we have equity in the decisions that we're making. I'm also an entrepreneur and a contractor with Accurate America. I have an equity position there. So I also come from a business perspective of how can we make this make sense for all parties involved. I hope to add value to this task force, and I hope to be able to make equitable change that is better for the environment, but also provides change and considers the people and the human part of this as well.
Thanks, Josh. So glad to have you here. Sorry to miss you at the first meeting, and it's really great that you could make it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yep. Okay, Sonia Riggs, you're up next, and then we'll go to Ian Tafoya, Maggie Nichols, and Christy Turner.
Hi, everybody. Sonia Riggs. I'm the president and CEO of the Colorado Restaurant Association. We represent thousands of restaurants around the state of Colorado. And I'm really motivated by not only the work that this task force is doing. I really enjoyed the first meeting and I look forward to seeing what we're doing today, but honestly, just seeing my neighbors doing a good job at recycling and composting. So it's, once a week, we're seeing it happen just right around us. So thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ian Thomas Tafoya. I'm here representing the petitioners for Waste No More. And I'm also the Colorado State Director for Green Latinos. And what am I excited about? I'm right here at the University of Denver right now. I was teaching law school about environmental justice. So just exciting to see students really wanting to be involved around equity in the environment.
Love it. Thank you. Maggie.
Hi, I'm Maggie Nichols. I work for Iron Woman Construction. I manage their transportation department, and we do ankle down construction. Something that's excited me is really, the industry in general, the construction industry. I've been really excited over the last month, all the conversations I've had about reuse and recycling, and I think, and then our future generations as well. I think that's what inspires me every day.
Thank you. Christy, go ahead. You're up next. Then we'll go to Andrea. Yeah, then we'll go to Andrea Furness and Marguerite Harden after you.
Hi, everyone. Christy Turner, founder and CEO of Scraps. We just had our 6th birthday party last night. We are a compost hauling company based in the Denver area, but servicing the entire Denver metro. two really inspiring things. One, this, you can't quite see it, but there's a new patio back there built largely from materials collected through Anna Perks's deconstruction company. And our entire new container office is also outfitted with stuff that's been salvaged through Anna's hard work on her end. So just love keeping it going round and round. And just came back from one of our brewery partners that just started the brew this morning for our first ever beer collaborations. We're doing an Earth Day brew using Kernza and some honey that we got from one of our BOMA members. We're a member of BOMA who has honeybee or who has beehives on their roof. So yeah, lots of like fun, full circle, zero waste, local regenerative stuff today to be excited about.
Thank you so much. Andrea, go ahead, and then Marguerite, and then Holly.
Hi, yes, so I'm here representing the special events community as well, as Renee. And
You're good.
Okay. So I am motivated and inspired by this group, and what I just heard from Christy was amazing and so cool. And I'm excited to be learning so much from all of you. I'm also inspired by my colleagues at the Denver Art Museum, who we have a whole green team that is made up of members of our staff, and they are having their first sustainability fair coming up here soon to celebrate Earth Day. So I am constantly inspired by what they're doing as well.
Good afternoon, all. Marguerite Harden. I am a homeowner and resident of a multifamily small apartment building and on the HOA boards representing that community separately, not representing this community, but I do work for the State Colorado Resiliency Office, which has some obvious tie-ins here. Inspiration. I once sailed through the Pacific Garbage Patch and took visual data for NOAA, which resulted in a bunch of findings. And I guess that was probably more motivational than inspirational, but through that, I have been more inspired by some of the volunteer groups that I've worked with and volunteered with, Surfrider Foundation, and here in Colorado, the Inland Ocean Coalition. Yeah.
Thank you. Holly.
Hi, I'm Holly Adenoff. I'm the owner and general manager of Sullivan Scrap Kitchen. We're devoted to reducing food waste and making delicious seasonal shared plates in the Denver area. And my inspiration comes from a little win for our restaurant. After 6 months of working, we finally got our recycling vendor figured out. And I feel like that just inspires me. It makes me believe that we're going to figure things out on an infrastructure basis for properties that have very small property lines. So yeah, I'm inspired.
Thanks, Holly. Can we go next to Luis Ponce and then Van Fussell and Jesse?
Hi, Luis Ponce. I'm the Director of Research for SAU Local 105. I'm also a coordinator for the Green Janitorial Education Program in downtown for our janitors, and happy to be here.
Great to have you. And for those of you who joined late, I asked if you have something hopeful in terms of reducing landfill waste, community sustainability, please feel free to share that too. Go ahead, Van, and then Jesse.
Howdy, folks. Van with Compost Colorado. We collect compostable waste from Parker through Broomfield. And I'm also on the board of Denver Food Rescue and helped campaign for Waste No More. I'm really excited and inspired by the elementary school and middle school kids who came by and painted this mural at our facility and got to learn about composting. It's exciting to see the next generation get involved with sustainability and zero waste at such a young age. And that really inspires me. And I'm also really inspired about Tuesday, the Truth in Labeling bill will be debated at the Capitol building, and I'll be testifying on that piece of legislation, which will help curb contamination at composting facilities. Thank you.
Thanks, Van.
Hi, this is Jessie. I'm with Unico Properties. So we, similar to Stephen, we work in commercial office space and retail space. So I'm really excited because I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the landscape that's out there right now, help tenants and individuals in the city, have access to different services, recycling and composting that they may not currently have, and just provide education so that those streams can be better utilized and better adhered to.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, so I think maybe, let's see, what other task force members? Brennan, are you sitting in for somebody on the task force who can't make it today?
Hi, I'm actually not sure. I know Steven sent me a message and said that.
She's a proxy.
Yes, proxy. Thanks, Steven.
Okay.
Not today. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Did I miss any task force members? I know there's a bunch of members of the public, and some of you are members of represented organizations here, and it's wonderful to see you, but I want to make sure, are there any task force members who I'm missing? And then I'm going to just ask city staff if you guys could just do a quick round of introductions. Grace, maybe I'll start with you, and you can go to Blake to introduce himself for the first time too. And then
Sure.
just
Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Rink. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency.
Blake. And then can you pass the baton, Blake, after you're done?
Sure. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blake Adams. I am the new Zero Waste Circular Economy Manager. I'll have an opportunity to share a little bit more about myself, but it's a pleasure to be here today. Who should I pass the baton to? That's the question. CASR folks, is that what we're talking about, Ryan?
Yeah, everybody. I'll do my screen. That might be easier.
Yeah.
Let's do Erica first.
Hey everybody, I'm Erica Rogers. I'm the Policy Director in our Business Licensing Department for the city.
And can we go to Anna? Will you introduce yourself and Taylor?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Erickson. I work on the disposable bag fee program with Blake and the Zero Waste Circular Economy team.
And I'm Taylor Mollers. I'm with the Climate Office. I'm on our communications and engagement team.
Great. And Greg, Jessica?
Greg Thomas, Public Health and Environment, jack of all trades.
Jessica Lally, I'm here with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Nina?
Nina Waysdorf, I'm the Waste Diversion and Recycling Manager for Solid Waste Management, so also in Dottie.
About
Rose, if you go.
Rose, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rose Watts. I'm Deputy Director of the Office of Special Events.
Tom Gleason, Jill Jennings.
Tom Gleason, CASR.
Hi, Jill Jennings, Golek, Deputy Director, Community Planning and Development.
Thanks to all of you. Who did I miss from the city? Anyone? And then there's someone calling in from a phone number ending in 6366, just in case you're a task force member or city staff. And otherwise, thank you for being here.
We have Mary also.
Oh, it's Mary. Okay. Hi, Mary. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mary Gerhardt. I'm the Senior Policy Manager for the Utilities Administration in Dottie, which includes the Solid Waste Group.
Great. Okay, any final city staff introductions? Okay. Thanks, everybody. It's really helpful to see who's here, and it is really an incredible group of people. So I think, Sophia, you can go ahead and share the screen, share the PowerPoint, and we'll talk about what we're doing today. So that right there was the list of all of you. And if you go to the first slide, I think you're on the last slide. There you go. So here's what we're doing today. We are in a minute here. I'm going to turn to Grace Rink to just recap what came out of the March meeting and some of the follow-up actions, and just a reminder of where we are in the process and how today's meeting fits in. And then we're going to go to several of you all, task force members. I've, after the last meeting, asked to snapshot the lay of the land in your realm to help inform today's conversation. So we're going to hear from you. We're going to get you all into small groups to discuss what you've heard. and talk about key opportunities for the rollout of the ordinance. And then we'll come back as a full group after a short break. We'll talk about work groups at the end of today, and then we'll close up at 5 o'clock. And so you can go to the next slide. And so I'm going to pass to Grace just to do a quick reminder of what we're doing here.
Thanks very much. And yes, I do. I'm going to give this reminder and then talk about our meeting recap. An important part of recording this today is it's going to be available on our website. So members of the public who, obviously weren't able to join our first meeting that was in person, and anyone else later will be able to see this and understand what we're doing. So the Waste No More ordinance, or Waste No More ballot measure, is now an ordinance. But we know that there are some challenges with it, not the least of which is that the timeline began before it was voted on. So our charge is to take a look at what does it take to make this truly implementable in the way that the voters intended, and to make sure that the requirements are clear, the enforcement process is clear, and really make sure that this gets us to where we want to be, which is that everybody in Denver, no matter where they are, has access to recycling and composting, and that all of our C&D waste is also moving out of the landfill and into reuse. Go ahead. I guess, Sophia, you're running the slideshow. Thank you. So Waste No More, this is the basics of what it covers. So it's really what I call it the private sector, but of course there's actually lots of public sector buildings that are covered by this as well. The city of Denver provides waste services to small residential. So that's single family homes and apartment buildings with less than 8 units. This is applicable to everyone else. So apartment buildings with more than 8+ units, all of our commercial buildings, all buildings over 5,000 square feet, special events, construction demolition projects, and then the very long list of all the places where we produce food waste. Next slide, please. And a reminder of the very basics of the ordinance and when it takes effect. So the first implementation date is actually behind us. And so that would have been requiring access to composting and recycling at all apartment buildings that are 75 units or larger, all of our food trucks, and all special events. Coming right up very soon, June 1st of 2023, would capture the next set of apartment buildings starting at 25 units and larger. Our commercial buildings, 25,000 square feet, food waste producers, and all C&D. And then in each of the subsequent years, we move towards capturing what we end up calling all, right? All other commercial, all other food waste producers. Next slide. So today, we are going to be talking about implementation and enforcement. And we've mentioned this before. Is it as simple as just pushing back the timeline by 1 year so that it takes us to where we are today? So it would begin this year and move into the next. The phasing the way that we think is optimal for which type of entity goes first, which type of entity goes last? Do we think there are any changes needed to that? And then how do we, as a city that needs to make this regulation clear and enforceable, how do we consider market and infrastructure constraints in that? It's difficult for a regulator to hold an entity accountable to something that is outside of their control if they really can't comply after showing good faith. We would like to identify, do those conditions exist? And if they do, how do we accommodate that? So these are the types of nitty-gritty in the weeds discussions that we're going to have today. Next slide. Ryan, is this back to you?
Nope, you can do this one.
It's still me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is just a look ahead to where we are. So we already had our first March meeting. We're here today at the April meeting, and at the end, we're going to be setting up our work groups. When you'll hear this again later, but I just want you to know in advance, when we talk about work groups, it doesn't mean that these are going to be subcommittees that have to meet week after week consistently for the next 5 months. There may be work groups that only need to meet one time to get into the details on a very specific elements of this ordinance. There may be others that will need to meet a couple of times. And so we'll talk about that towards the end of this meeting. In May, we're going to be doing a deep dive on what does equity mean in this context, and how do we address that in the ordinance. And we'll also spend time talking about what are the supports, financial and technical, that you think this, the market needs to see in order to make this really implementable. In June, we'll take a closer look at what compliance and enforcement look like. And I think a lot of that content is going to be generated by those small working groups. In July, we'll finally be talking about communication, which is really coming up as a consistent theme. And although communication, or at least universal signage or symbols, is talked about in the ordinance, this is really a category of affiliated recommendations that you'll make to the city, because we know we have a very big, a heavy lift on communication that we need to do. And then we're going to be getting into what are the recommendations, the draft recommendations that you want to put forward for public comment. And we'll do that in August, which is why it's not shown here. And then in September, we'll actually take all that public comment and hopefully refine that into your final set of recommendations that then you'll present to staff. Next slide. Okay, now it's back to Ryan, right?
Yeah, and I don't need to belabor any of this. I think
Okay.
it's self-explanatory. We talked about it last time, but I think a couple things to highlight here is, we know you all are a link between the task force and your own peer communities. And so we just really appreciate you continuously reviewing the materials, taking it to the folks in your communities, getting input and bringing it back to the task force, because you represent so many stakeholder interests. And just a reminder, our time is limited, and there's so many great and important perspectives that we want to just make space for everyone here. And I think that's all I need to say about this. Lastly, we have a chat. Task force members, please feel free to put questions in the chat. You can raise your hand virtually or in real life. But let's not have like big discussions in the chat, because we want to save those for the small groups and the full group as well. Members of the public that are here, you can email sustainability@denvergov.org with any questions or comments, input for the task force. And there will be a in-depth public input period in August as well, but just so you know, and thanks Taylor for putting that in the chat. Great. And Grace, I'm going to go back to you to do a quick recap and talk about follow-up from last meeting.
Okay, next slide. Actually, we're starting with the results of the survey. So thank you to the many of you who did reply to that. I really appreciate it. So first, just housekeeping. The majority of respondents can meet in person, but not everybody for every meeting. And so I do have a space for us to meet in person in May that has a high quality virtual feed, right? Because the room that we were in last month would not have been a high quality feed for the people who are participating remotely. I'm learning about other rooms that can seat this many people and have that high quality feed. So I'll continue working on that for June and July, but I've got May and September nailed down. The landfill tours, there was a lot of interest in that. So Greg Thomas from DDPHE, he'll be sending out invitations to those. If you want to attend, accept. If you don't, that's fine. It's not mandatory, but it will be available to you. There also was lots of interest in tours of the Waste Management's MRF, A1 Organics, and also Compost Colorado. So I will work with those representatives to see if we can set those up and also get invites out to you for those. Next slide. Okay, so some of the concerns that were raised, if you recall, there were some narrative responses, narrative questions. And so these are some of the big themes that came out that in this case, these were themes that were answered or responded to by multiple people. So it seems that recycling is available in about half of the facilities that are regulated right now, but the service frequency can be inconsistent, and there were reports of contracts being canceled or not being picked up. So that's just a point of information. Very few of the regulated entities already have compost service. There is no real data available on the cost. So the cost that regulated entities already have for waste pickup, that's already passed on to tenants and customers. And what we don't know, though, is exactly how is the cost going to change or increase. There were some assumptions it'll probably double current costs. This is probably something that we need to a group of us might need to dig into to try to figure out, what are the costs really going to be? There are different opinions of who should be responsible for the sorting and where that should be done. There's a lot of concern about the individuals, whether it's people visiting an arena or apartment dwellers or even people in office buildings doing it themselves not doing it correctly, and then having a cascade of challenges down the line. There's also concerns about the space required in all types of different facilities to set up those sorting systems. This isn't the issue with consumers is not just about consumer confusion, but also that we're asking for major behavior change, and these are different things. So just because we educate people doesn't mean they actually take that action. So a number of respondents talked about that. And then, although we all seem to have agreed, we understand what the intent of the voters is or was when they passed this. And as written, this ordinance would be implemented or phased in over a period of 4 years. However, there were some respondents who expressed concern that that is not long enough. And I think it might come up in your small group meetings today. And I think we need to have honest conversations about that. Blake is also going to have a presentation here where he'll show some timelines from other cities as well. And all of that will come into the discussion. Next slide. And so from the meeting one recap, again, start here with, we all see, everybody agrees, or at least is in support of the voters' intent of achieving 100% participation by the regulated entities within about 4 years, which is how the ordinance is written. There was discussion that it may make sense to start with the biggest generators of waste first, that the intent is to move as much waste as we can out of the landfill and into diversion. And if we want to do that quickly, start with the biggest first. And then, but we also talked about alternative phasing strategies. So again, looking at who is scheduled to go first in the ordinance as it's written, is that optimal or not? Again, reinforcing that clarity and simplicity are very important for education, but also for enforcement, so that the ordinance as it's written can be understood by those entities that are being regulated. And then that we knew that the meetings coming up and then the work groups are going to dig into these details. We will have some large group discussions as well, but we're also going to have the small working groups, and they'll report out and bring their recommendations to the larger group.
So
I think it's back to Ryan.
Yeah, so we wanted to pause here because we're gonna transition right now to hearing from Blake Adams about what's happening in other cities, and then hearing from many of you in terms of the realities on the ground in your sector to inform our discussion today. But I just wanted to pause and see if there's any questions from task force members about what was just said. Any clarifying notes or questions? I'm just gonna look for your hands, or you're welcome to. Okay. Awesome. And just to remind everybody, all of these materials from the first meeting are on the city's website. And Sophia, thank you. She just put a link in the chat to the PDF of this presentation, of today's presentation, which you'll also get by email and is going to be on the website. So I think with that, I'm just going to remind you that this whole next conversation is intended to frame this question of what should the rollout look like within the parameters of generally what the voters agreed on, knowing that there's some tweaks to be made. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Blake to go ahead and talk about what's happening in other cities and how that might inform this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We can go to the next slide, Sophia. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blake Adams, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here today and to meet you all. My new role, for which I'm just 1 month in, is the Zero Waste and Circular Economy Manager for the City and County of Denver. Since I am so brand new, I asked just for the opportunity to introduce myself, share a little bit more about my background and experience leading zero waste programs. I'm coming here to Denver via Washington, D.C., where I spent the better half of a decade leading DC's zero waste efforts. In due time, I'll have a much better idea concerning my overall vision and direction for zero waste and circular economy here in Denver. But for now, I still have a lot to learn. And I think I can't think of a better way to quickly get familiarized with the local problem here in Denver than to be here present among this task force and listening intently. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. Before I begin, I just want to make a clear disclaimer that I am here as a resource to you, the members of this task force. I'm here to offer my professional opinion based on years of experience, but I am not nor is CCD or the City of County of Denver endorsing nor formally recommending any one or set of policy options. Today, I'll simply be sharing what I believe is the appropriate level of context, so we all may gain the right perspective on what is possible and what has worked well historically in other cities here in the US from a policy standpoint. And lastly, I'll be offering up some suggested areas of concern or areas of focus to keep in mind when we're discussing implementation, aka rollout. So to this end, again, I'm here as a resource to bounce things off of and to ask clarifying questions too. My email contact information is in the bottom right, so please don't hold back and please feel to reach out if you have any individual or collective questions regarding Waste No More and the possible policy options at our disposal. Next slide, please. So we shared a policy document. I believe it's included on the Google shared drive under meeting materials and resources. And that document goes into detail on these different localities here on the left. So really touch upon universal recycling ordinances of Austin, San Francisco, Boulder as great examples. We also talk about organics diversion and landfill bans, which are a little bit different than what is in Waste No More, but I think are relevant to show what has worked well on the East Coast in terms of organics and how specifically they've rolled out implementation in the commercial space. And then lastly, we highlight some model C&D or deconstruction types of policies, San Diego, Alameda County, Boulder. So I won't go into detail on these. Again, that handout is available to you, and I encourage you all to use that as a sort of cheat sheet when considering what is possible here. In terms of shared obstacles, I think it's important to kind of step back and appreciate that all of these cities here on the left and others, they've shared the same set of obstacles or challenges when they've approached implementation. They've all faced risk of high contamination, the lack of processing capacity, paperwork, the need to do studies, bureaucracy, measurement, and they've all overcome that to some degree. Now, there's certainly probably some lessons learned and some things that these localities would have done differently. But again, these are meant to just provide the context for the discussion that we're having today. And lastly, I just want to highlight that I often describe zero waste as both a technical and adaptive problem. So you need both sets of solutions to approach and to solve for it. So there are both hard, real world things like infrastructure, supply chains, technology, but you also need to approach it from the other side of the human aspect with education, outreach, enforcement, pilots, and those types of things. So just keep that in mind, that you need both sets of solutions to solve for this problem. Next slide, please. So again, the handout does a better job of explaining exactly how these localities rolled out universal recycling or composting. I think you'll see here clearly, though, that Denver mirrors quite similarly to what the city of Austin did. The big difference, obviously, being Austin rolled this out, I think about 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more. They did not include organics in that ordinance, so it was just a true universal recycling ordinance. But you can see here as these tiers, or you can think of them as years of implementation rollout. It's quite similar. Now, the obvious differences are San Francisco and Boulder did not have a phased implementation approach. It was a universal recycling and composting ordinance that rolled out to everybody all at the same time. And obviously, there are many different approaches and options that cities have had and that we as a community have to phase in recycling and composting. And it's important to note that comparisons are only so useful, and that all cities are quite different. And so they all have their own sets of challenges. And ultimately, phasing and how we determine what's appropriate should be partly informed by data, housing, property stock statistics, solid waste generation, and available city resources. Next slide, please. And lastly, I just want to highlight a few commonalities that all successful zero waste policies share, not just universal recycling and composting ordinances, but the full suite. The most important I want to stress is that they all promote and incentivize or encourage the optimal zero waste behavior. So this could be source separation, deconstruction, the disassembly of materials such as electronics into their individual components. That's very critical, and that's the, it's reduce, reuse, and to break things down. That's very supportive of a circular economy. It's also the tried and true way is to tackle organics and recycling and the issue of contamination together all at once. And that leads into having a unified enforcement effort. Tackling them individually can be lengthy, problematic, costly for the city, and it requires an ununified approach to education and enforcement. Policy can be used to be designed to spur investment in supporting infrastructure, and I would argue that the best policies out there do that. They think about end markets. They think about what's supporting infrastructure when designing those policies. A great commonality is to avoid unnecessary measurement, feasibility studies, plans, and reports. Again, the key word here being unnecessary. There certainly will be some measurement required, some data collection, but oftentimes cities can get stuck spinning the wheels, doing feasibility studies that aren't necessary and aren't value added. Standardizing containers messaging. I think that one speaks for itself. Very critical for any program or policy you're going to roll out is that the messaging, the containers, the scheme is all standardized citywide. And then lastly, providing financial and technical assistance programs can really expedite adoption. On the financial side, you have things like grants, zero interest loans, cost and equipment sharing programs. On the technical side, contracting support, in-person trainings, webinars, LMS. All of these things are tools that the city has to help speed up adoption and participation. And then lastly, very important, designing policies to evolve with the markets and the times. I'm sure all of the processors and all of the haulers in the room will agree that a ton of solid waste that they collected 10 or 20 years ago is very different than today, and it'll probably change. And I think it's impossible to predict the future. However, you can bake into policy the ability to revise or expand the list of entities that are covered as well as the materials. And that flexibility, as well as waivers and exemptions for certain businesses to be excluded, can be very powerful and allow for success to occur. So hopefully I stayed on time, Ryan. Thank you all. And again, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here to answer any questions at the end if you have them.
And I wish that what would be ideal, Blake, is if we had time to pause and just, have a discussion with you about everything you just presented. And I think in the interest of time and the presentations to come from all of you, we're going to keep going and people should put questions in the chat, but knowing that these will be ongoing discussions and we will structure time at the next meeting if that's useful, and also work groups. So thank you, Blake, a lot. And now I just want to give a preemptive thank you to a number of you who were volunteered to give presentations on the following 4 topics to help inform the rest of the task force about what are the opportunities and realities out there in your worlds and the key challenges that we need to think about in this rollout. So the first group, Chris Chiari, Jesse, yep, there you go, and Peggy and Stephen, thank you so much. And I'm just going to pass it to you. And I gave everyone an impossible task of like 3 minutes and 3 slides or so. So if you could keep it as to that, that would be amazing. Thank you. And so I'm not sure which of you wants to start, but I think you're muted if you're talking.
Yes, Peggy Panzer here. I'll kick us off. And I wanted to just point out that Stephen, his name wasn't on that first slide, but he was a critical piece of this, and a shout out to our team. It was a great group, very collaborative. So thanks everyone for the input. So what we wanted to talk about is the biggest constraints about distributed infrastructure. And we bolded the most critical pieces here that we could identify. So they're all important, but the bolded ones we found the most important. I will start with those two. So one has to do with the financial end of this, which is the cost of compliance. And there's several one-time hits, which is the infrastructure, the physical structures, the containers, and so on, but the ongoing cost of additional labor that will likely be needed, and that needs to be built into budgets, as well as hauling costs increasing on an ongoing basis. And then the second most important factor we thought was the hauler capacity. And is there a plan to expand? What is that plan? What does it look like? We need to account for that and be able to handle that. Aside from that, the existing footprint, and I'll make these real quick. I may not go through all of them for time reasons, but the existing footprint is important for what we need to budget for at our sites. Okay, the second one, I think we'll turn over to Stephen.
Peggy, real quick, can you talk about what you mean by distributed infrastructure?
This has to do with how this is going to impact the sites that that the composting and recycling is expected on, such as apartment communities, buildings, commercial buildings, medical office buildings, hotels, and so on.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Peggy. Oh, are we going to Stephen next?
Yes, I think Stephen will be next.
So yeah, on this one, one of the things that we discussed, and keep it very quick as well, education, making sure that we're clear and consistent in whichever group is being educated. So we know that there's going to be different entities that need to be educated, from the public to, staff at restaurants and at buildings and apartment complexes, as well as tenants. Target and focus the PR, one of the things that on the streams that can be monetized. And I think what we're talking about is, in order to make it simple to achieve, the general public needs to understand the value of what they're recycling at the end, right? So what is that value of where the plastics are going to be turned into Rothy shoes that seem to be very popular with women these days? So I think it's that back end benefit and making sure the community understands that, as well as how everything is processed at the front end. So we heard earlier today about a lot of people wanting to go out and seeing the composting sites and all those kinds of things. And then making sure that as we phase in, start with organizations that are going to have the biggest impact, which that was another thing that Grace talked about. So how can we make a big impact in order to make that fast and swift? Because of whether or not those organizations are already doing recycling and or composting, they're already planning to do that. And then where can we, so that we're the harder to work with groups are the ones that we have more time to work on the rollout for that. And I think, Blake touched on a lot of that in his presentation as to some of the best practices in cities like Austin.
Stephen, is someone going after you for your group?
Jesse is going to go.
Please, thank you to the last slide. Okay, so building on what Stephen said, the components of this that we anticipate to be a bit harder to achieve. Again, I'm not going to touch on everything on this page, but I think the two big things that stood out to us are basically funding and incentives. I think a lot of the people that are going to be subject to the ordinance, our group thinks that the people subject to the ordinance are probably going to want to know how they're going to pay for this and what their additional costs will be. So having a good understanding of what those costs might be and if incentives or assistance would be relevant, whether that's for specific groups that qualify based on financial hardship or other factors. Are there potentially technical assistance opportunities that can be offered, like something along the lines of city appointed waste, representative that helps with the education and figuring out your space constraints and those types of things. So obviously the financial side is a big factor for us. And another one that really stood out to us is trying to figure out how we can kind of, my term here is future proofing. So, there's going to be changes that are going to happen within what materials are accepted. There's going to be, haulers are going to have to make changes at some point in the future. And at that point in time, how does the ordinance prepare for that and try to be flexible enough to accommodate those changes when they come and still achieve the goal without, losing participation by individuals being confused or unsure of what they're supposed to be mindful of. So yeah, I think that's what we've got for you guys today.
That is awesome. And again, I would love to leave time for questions and comments now, but I think I'll leave that for your small groups. But you all are amazing. And I'm going to just transition now to the large scale haulers and processors. So Erwin and Christopher Berry, thank you so much for thinking about this. And again, just an encouragement to keep it to 3 to 4 minutes if you can, and I'll go to you.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Now we can. Yeah.
I apologize, I'm a little under the weather, but I'll give it my best shot. So some of the key constraints for large scale haulers and processors that we identified. We'll start with some of the supply chain and workforce challenges. We feel that one of our biggest issues is going to be the lead time for purchasing new trucks. Currently, we are experiencing about a 12-month lead time for any new purchases. I think that one's going to be key. The other issues that we're going to have, potential for continued industry-wide shortage of drivers, helpers, dispatchers, manpower is going to be an issue. Then we're talking about the containers and the adequate space for the customer containers for the drivers to safely service these locations, as well as determining the correct size and the frequency of pickups. I think that's going to be an issue as well, something we need to focus on. We're going to the next slide for infrastructure challenges. A couple of issues that we identify there. Capacity for collecting and processing the increased volume of organics. I think that's going to be our biggest issue. Just to simply, picking up the organics and shipping it out to the processing locations, it's going to be a problem. As far as the single stream and the trash, that's not going to be a problem for the increased volume for the facilities. But we feel that yes, the compost is going to be the biggest problem there. And then I'm going to hand this off to Chris so that he can wrap this up.
I'll wrap up this slide. Contamination is the #1 challenge our industry faces in recycling and organic streams. We got to be serious about it and take on contamination early and often. Last slide, please. And we can do this with a robust, straightforward education campaign. Education must be simple and consistent for residents and haulers. On-the-ground audits are needed early to help establish baselines and to check to see how people are doing. The data can be used to focus additional education where contamination is high. As we've heard, phasing is necessary and appropriate. There are existing pilot programs out there And they need to be made available to leaders and fast followers and early adopters. And then we got to find ways to replicate that success. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, you all, again, huge thank yous for consolidating so much information and thinking into a really concise snippets. So moving to organics, and Clinton and Van, thanks again for thinking about this, and Christy from afar. I know you were traveling during this time, but yeah, go ahead. Again, if you could keep it to 3 to 4 minutes. Thanks.
And the previous groups did a great job, touching on a lot of our points, but obviously one of the biggest things that the organic stream is facing is a lack of infrastructure, and A1 Organics does not have the capacity by themselves to take on the expected throughput of Waste No More. And so we need more large scale infrastructure, but we also need more small scale and community style organics processing, more local anaerobic digestion, more community composting sites that have worked in other cities like New York City and others that can help in the process of engaging and educating folks on why composting is important, and help also stimulate in markets. Those are some of the other benefits of having smaller scale community composting. And then Clinton was going to go dive into sortation and contamination prevention.
Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. Yeah, guys, so it's similar to what Chris Berry just said. Ultimately, eliminate contamination. Contamination is our #1 concern when it comes to this stream, the organic stream. And we firmly believe sortation is the key to this, and sortation at all levels. So starting at the generator to the transfer facility to A1 Organics being the last touch. And so implementing requirements for sortation at the source, effective collection systems capable of rejecting unsorted materials, having adequate processing infrastructure so that we can send these materials to composting, anaerobic digestion, whatever that end market might be. Again, particular to A1 or to compost manufacturing is you are creating a finished product that has so much benefit to be brought back to where it came from. And so implementing some finished product markets prior to implementing Waste No More allows us to have that end market. Very important. Again, and then on that third one right there, high level, effective education, understanding for the generators. And this can be focused on the why, like why, the real why, what are we creating? And that's why when I talk about, finished product markets, erosion control, stormwater management, parks and recreation, engineered soils, green roofs, all these amazing opportunities to use a finished product right here in the city of Denver to do exactly what we're trying to do, which is reduce greenhouse gases, save water, pull carbon out of the air. Next slide. Won't dive in too much. There was the why. I jumped in on that real quick. A big hurdle we see is like when you want to tap into one of the best end markets, which would be agricultural in our farm community, is figuring out funding opportunities and partnerships to offset the cost of compost transportation or application for the farmer. That's a big hurdle for farmers. It's an end market. It's why it's really hard to get into it. Some zoning code alignment with CDPHE, that's in there for Van to help him out on the small scale, the community scale composter and the AD. One more slide. Again, consider rolling out compost slowly. Take time rolling out. Really important. Like I really appreciated what Blake said about the unified grouping of everything coming out at once, so that you can have that unified communication, that unified, what am I trying to say? The unified response. And if you have to have authoritarian response, then it's all the same. And that's really important. And then one thing, I'll get off, is yes, when you think about the capacity, of 120,000 tons annually, that is 17 trucks daily coming out. If it was coming out to our site, 17 trucks daily, which is mainly going to be food, lots of food. you still need a lot of carbon wood to process that food. So it's going to take multiple end market or multiple infrastructure capacity that we need. It's really important. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And just a note, there's a note in the chat, Erwin and Chris Berry from Greg, and I think it would be really interesting to see a response. Probably everyone would be interested if you could put something in the chat. But we have like 3 minutes left, and I'm gonna go to Anna and JW to talk about construction and deconstruction demolition.
Hey everyone, so from the deconstruction demolition side, challenges include lack of contractor and homeowner knowledge about what's recyclable and reusable. There's a lack of nonprofits that accept materials in the area. The nearest wood recycling facility is in Boulder. When you compare full house deconstruction versus traditional bulldozing, deconstruction is initially 3 to 8 times more expensive. We're taking a team of 5 people to systematically unbuild the house. So there's a upfront cost, but you can use tax deductions to help offset that cost. So that looks like donating entire lumber packages from a house can appraise to a high value around $20,000, $30,000, and then people can get a tax benefit to offset the deconstruction cost. There's also a perceived negative impact on construction schedule when you think about deconstructing. It's difficult to enforce and measure compliance with C&D materials. Some materials aren't readily accessible to separate and divert. Think stucco with wire mesh and sprayed in foam, and then lack of space for separating items in some areas. Opportunities. So C&D is a big portion of our waste stream. It's about 30 to 40% of our landfill. And of that piece, 90% of it comes from demolition projects. So we have a huge opportunity to recover concrete, asphalt, wood, and steel. Those metrics are from the 2018 CDPHE report study. And there are readily available markets for materials like scrap metal, clean wood, reusable salvage items, concrete, and brick. And then recycling clean concrete, brick, asphalt is free. Like I mentioned, the tax deductions are available to help offset costs. Unbuilding houses, deconstructing houses is a great way to learn construction skills, so workforce training and green job opportunities. And when you compare soft strip deconstruction, which includes cherry picking high value items like doors, windows, hardwood flooring, appliances, cabinets, that can be just as cost competitive. You're paying somebody to take those materials out anyways, so you could pay them to deconstruct rather than demo, and that's just as competitive in terms of pricing. In terms of opportunities for this group, we could think about clarifying and defining reusing salvage plan requirements, and then also think about how this is all tied into current permitting and clarifying what percentage of materials we're going to require. Is it 100% of materials or 75% of a house, etc. I'll turn it to JW next.
Cool. Uh-oh. Can nobody see me?
We
can see you and hear you.
Okay, perfect. No, Anna, thank you. And I'm quite a bit quicker. I see myself more as part of the problem than Anna being part of the solution. As a big builder, we tend to generate quite a bit of waste, and I guess our thing is our takeoff errors, the extra material we have. Filthy job sites, these things can lead to unsafe work conditions. I guess where I kind of see fitting into this is how can we, as an industry, fit into the mix of using this waste to create an opportunity for, some of the composting, some of the other organic stuff like that, or how can we get in front of it to keep it out of the landfills? And I guess that's kind of the real reason I'm here, is to just get some education on that, to get it before it becomes a problem, if that makes sense.
And do you guys have one last, let's see, is that it? You have one last slide? Okay, I think did we get to the end of yours?
I
Yes.
think so.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, first of all, just a huge thank you to all of you. That was a ton of work and it was like invaluable, as I probably everyone agrees, just to hear from the source in such a focused way. So thanks all of you. And all of that, we want you to take into your breakout groups in a few minutes here to discuss the following. So given all that, what is the optimal balance for a phased rollout that, first of all, gets to full implementation within a discrete number of years? The voters said around 4. So then secondly, accommodates realities that you just heard about, all the challenges and constraints that are out there. And then thirdly, aligns with the principles you've articulated already. So we have a couple slides just to flesh out what we mean here. So you all set out guiding principles in your first meeting, and you talked about a number of things, but one is, we have to keep with the will of the voters, maximizing waste diversion in whatever is the most strategic way possible with universal access to composting and recycling. And then equitable, that less resource buildings and communities are prioritized, especially those facing factors like climate change and pollution, and same with the workforce that will be performing all of this, and that it's cost effective. That it's feasible for buildings, for the city, for consumers, that it's sustainable. So, leading to building momentum, early success, leading to long-term success and confidence of the public, cost effective, and resilient in the sense that it's, it's adaptive, it's flexible, able to adjust to as new technologies and markets are available. So this is sort of a consolidation of all of those things that you talked about last month. So we want you to keep those in mind. And then here's just a picturing of the timeline. And Erica, Grace, do you want to say anything about this? I think it's self-explanatory and Grace already talked about it. Anything that you want to say here?
No, I think it's really helpful. Erica put this together, and it's the same information, but in a different visualization. I think it's really helpful to see it this way.
And I should tell you that we are going to that there's a handout for you for each of your small groups that will have a link to that will have all of this information for you to reference. And it's also in the PowerPoint that Sophia put in the chat earlier in the meeting. And then you can go to the next slide. So what we want you to think about are some different types of rollout options. These are not prescriptive. They're just kind of categories or buckets of different types of options. So Erica or Grace, you might want to say more about this, but basically all of these options would need to get to 100% participation within a certain discrete number of years. Option A is basically keep everything as is, as written in the ordinance, and just move it out 1 or more years. Given that we're already behind, so it has to be moved out. Option B, well, I think what I'm going to do is, Erica, can I pass it to you to say what you were thinking in terms of the types of options that would come under B and C?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Erica again. And just for a little bit more of a caveat, this is a fun thing that we do in our office all the time. Whenever we're looking at updating ordinances, we like to give folks something to react to. So, we kind of organized it this way based on what we heard in our small groups and our large group discussion last time. That doesn't mean that there aren't other types of options, other buckets of options. We just tried to group them based on what you all had said last time. But at any time, if you're like, hey, you guys forgot something, we're always open to hearing what else there is. So like Ryan had said, option A is kind of the don't touch as little as possible, right? Move everything out in order to update the timelines, right? The deadlines, those July 1st dates, right? That appeared on the timeline. Option B would be to, some examples we heard last time of tweaking either the definitions of parties or the measures were in line with people were asking questions like, does this list of food compost waste producers include food licenses, like all of them, some of them? What other license types could it include? So that's an example. I know another group talked about maybe using tonnage instead of square footage as a measure for one of the phases. So that would be, these are the different kinds of options that could be further considered in work groups. And then the task force could provide those recommendations for the improvements in the report. Option C is similar, but it takes a wider approach, right? For option B, we're just looking at tweaking kind of the existing categories. Again, touching a little bit more than just those dates, but kind of staying within the framework. Option C puts all the different components on the table, right? Who are the categories of folks who are responsible under the ordinance? What is required, right? Composting, recycling, or both. The measures, tonnage versus square footage versus number of units, and then the deadlines, right? Again, the dates are going to always have to be considered because, like Ryan said, some of them are already behind us. So that's kind of a given. We have to move that. But in the small groups, we want you to think about how broad do you want to go with your recommendations when we get to the final task force report. So that's kind of the way we've grouped them. And if anyone has any questions about kind of that format, feel free to chime in.
And I think, so the small group facilitators, when we send you all to small groups in a second here, are going to reiterate what we want you to do, and they're going to walk you through this conversation. But really, this is a chance for you all just to freeform and brainstorm and share what you're thinking. So, and we'll come back and hear from all of you as a full group. You're going to have staff members in each of your small groups as well. So first of all, are there any questions about what we're about to ask you to do? You may have questions that can get answered in your small groups and by your small group facilitators. Any major questions? All right. Okay. I know that was like a ton of information, and now is your chance to go talk about it. So with that, I think Taylor is going to put everyone into small groups in a second. We're going to give you 40 minutes. So we're going to ask everyone to come back at 4. So we're small group facilitators, we're adjusting the timelines a little. So come back at 4. We'll give everyone a 5-minute break at that point and then hear from everybody. And there is an active chat going on, which I think we'll just leave be for a minute here. Grace, anything that we need to say before we go into small groups?
No, I think just for housekeeping purposes, maybe Taylor can explain this. The chat that we have going here still remains, even when we're in our small groups, right? We don't get a separate chat for that. I just want to clarify that. I never really understand when I'm in a breakout group.
And also just to reiterate, when you come back, what we'd love to hear is where was your group coalescing, if at all, in terms of certain kinds of options, certain buckets? Like, were you all thinking after everything you've heard that a certain type of option made sense? Were you really all over the map? Were there a couple of things that people talked about? But the real interest that we have is why, really talking about what is it about the different rollout options that are going to meet all the things that you heard today in light of the principles that you all have articulated being so important. So that's what we want to hear. We're not asking for concrete solutions. This is just the first piece, and it's going to inform where we go from here. So with that, Taylor, if you would send everyone into small groups, and a couple of us, Grace and I, might be popping in and out. Okay, everybody. We are gonna slowly come back from break. Thanks, everyone. We know that wasn't terribly long. We do want to get you out of here at 5, so we will get going in a minute. So as people are trickling back, I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks to the facilitators and note takers of those small groups, and for all of you for participating. A few of us were popping in and out, and they seemed really like very rich discussions. So look forward to hearing from all of you. Let's see, I'm just going to make sure we've got a majority of us back. I'll give everyone 30 more seconds. And again, if the chat reset, but we have a record of everything that was, all the comments, we'll include it in the summary. But if anyone has something you want to refer to from the early in the chat, just let us know and we'll repost it. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming back. And what we wanted to do for this next 25-30 minutes is give all of you a chance to hear from the different groups and identify some of the common themes that we're hearing. And so I think maybe we'll just go around and start with group one and hear from each of you. What were the highlights? What were the themes? What were the things that really resonated in terms of the different options for rolling out the ordinance? And then we'll have some discussion at the end about what we're all hearing. So who is group one?
I think we're group one.
Okay.
I'm almost positive it was group one.
You go for it.
So we had a really good discussion. Generally, we all agreed pretty quickly that option A needs to be off the table. And the reason we agreed with that is because we felt like it's just setting ourselves up for failure, that it's just too restrictive. And in order for us to be successful, we need to make some tweaks. We did have a lot of discussion about is option, I don't remember if it was B or 2 or 3, B or C. There were some that were really wanted to go with B and some that really wanted to go with C. I think that in the end, we sort of came to the conclusion that somewhere in between sort of that B and C might be the best way to go. Again, in order for us to be successful, we're going to be open to massaging this a bit. We also talked about what may be really helpful is reaching out to our respective segments or groups, like, for example, multifamily housing and restaurants and retail, et cetera, events, to find out who's already doing these programs and what's working and what's not working. And when they first started, what might their challenges have been, for example, educating employees, educating the public, constraints as far as size and cost and all of those kind of things. But we thought, we even were talking about a pilot program, but we thought in order to not draw it out so much, it might be better to start with those folks that are already doing a lot of what we're looking at, like the composting and recycling, and are really have implemented that into their businesses, and then really be able to focus on them first in some sort of a pilot program that we might be able to get results much faster if we we're able to bring those folks into working through this a little bit. We talked about how can we elevate best practices? How can we create incentives, for example, to help mitigate the cost of compliance overall? Because that if everybody's doing everything correctly, then it actually might help offset the cost overall, and therefore kind of really elevating best practices. We talked about that that it's going to be really important. The presentation that we saw today about what's working and what the challenges are in other cities, I think is going to be imperative that when we present our results to City Council, that we're actually really looking at those in more detail, and that we can use what they've already learned as part of our process here, as part of this work group. And that's going to be really important for us to reference those and actually give those examples to City Council. And then another thing is presenting City Council or something that to City Council that also establishes funding to pay groups to create education training. That, I guess, part of the discussion was, is this all going to be done through the city, or might we need to rely on outside groups to help with education, training, the actual work itself of implementing the program? Not sure what I mean, obviously the city is going to have to respond to that as well, but that we may need to be open to looking at a lot of outside partners to help us move forward with this as well.
That's great.
I think that's everything. Is there anybody in my group is there anything I missed, guys?
You're getting thumbs up from fellow
Okay.
group members.
Good
that-
discussion.
That was great. Thank you so much, Sonia, for the recap. I'm going to go to the next group, and then when we're done, we'll, people are welcome to piggyback and just say ditto and expand on what you heard from other groups. Nina, I think your group was a group 2, is that right?
Yes, and Christy is going to share out for us.
Okay, so similarly, we sort of discarded option A and discussed sort of a combination of options B and C. We think that having sort of a consistent drumbeat throughout, regardless of how timelines are extended and sort of reimagined, having a consistent message to the public beginning to end, as opposed to opening the door to potentially breaking public trust through sort of a stop-start scenario is really key. Education and sort of a unified public relations campaign, marketing campaign at the outset would be key. Similarly, Sonia, to what you mentioned, we discussed the possibility of outside funding and support being a piece of that, as opposed to just turning to city funding or tax dollars to cover that. And yeah, I don't want to repeat too much of what you said. Really focusing on, again, that sort of marketing and education campaign, and then sort of moving into participation and rapid adoption were Blake's terms that I really like, as opposed to rollout or, mandate, words that kind of might provoke a more defensive reaction in people, and then slowly phasing into performance, again, Blake's word, versus something like enforcement, which is just prone to public backlash. But again, having that sort of consistent unified campaign throughout. Yeah, is there, I don't want to take up too much time or repeat too much of what Sonia said. It sounds like we all sort of landed on B and C is the way to go versus A, and unified marketing and sort of consistent public messaging is key to not, well, I guess Councilperson Clark brought up, we do want to keep top of mind, not setting ourselves up for failure, but not setting ourselves up for a potential repeal in the future if it's perceived as such a disaster that voters decide they want to undo the whole thing in the future. Is there anything that I missed that wasn't mentioned already?
Thanks, Christy. That's great. It's really interesting to see the common themes. Group 3, Rose, was that your group?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll reiterate that we also felt like A just wasn't going to work. And some sort of hybrid between B and C. We don't want to take it all apart, but there needs to be a few more tweaks than just definitions and deadlines. So that was the high level, like, overall consensus of the group as far as what direction we go in. Some of the themes and takeaways were that the end markets and end of life processes need to be the lead measure versus the lag measure, because everything else is futile if we don't start there. Additionally, we talked a little bit about pilots, with some caution that we didn't want pilots to be the same thing as some of the feasibility studies that Blake mentioned early on as like a delay. So I think for areas where there's a lot of data already, or pilots have already happened nationally, that maybe that's not a good opportunity for a pilot, but for some sectors where maybe there is no data or there isn't a lot of front runners out there leading the way, that those might be good opportunities for pilot programs. Some of the things that I know we're going to talk about later in the work groups and in the large group meetings is funding, and then of course the contamination education piece. Anyone from my group want to chime in if I missed anything as far as like high level takeaways?
We talked about reiterating that what another group said, continuing education measures, so there's not that start and stop, and to piggyback however we can with messaging with Dottie's rollout of green cards this year.
Yep. Thank you, Ryan.
Great.
Yeah, that's a big opportunity there to like amplify the messaging.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, and for those of you who want to add to these, we'll kind of open it up for people's comments in a second. Group 4, let's hear from you. Erica, is that your group?
Yes, I was nominated to speak and I'm not sure how that happened, but come on, guys.
Voluntold. You were voluntold, I'm sure.
Yeah,
We're
and
already on to you.
and everyone should note that I did unmute myself first. So before starting to talk. So like pretty much everyone else, we landed on B and C. It seemed to me that we really kind of veered towards C because we had the best chance to win and do it right if we went with C. But the problem is the will of the voters was leaning more towards B. So that's something that we noted and we wanted to pay attention to, but we were sort of between B and C. A lot of the programs already in play now to some level, we just haven't gotten it right. So it's more about perfecting and getting the low-hanging fruit first so that we can do it right and show the public that there's intent and commitment and the intention to do everything right and actually getting it right. It definitely A was not an option. It just didn't give us the runway that we needed to get it right. We didn't want to be set up for failure. And that was the big concern, especially in the eyes of the public. And all of this had to be reasonable to do. And like I said, most of us are doing something to some level. We talked about things such as the facilities for composting and space and where's it going to happen. So there's some very real logistics that we need to nail down. That's outside of a lot of our ability to do anything about, as far as multifamily or office buildings, that type restaurants, we need to have the location to take it to. So it's really 360 degrees of operations that have to be in place to make all of it happen. That's kind of where we landed. Erica, I know you had the notes on this. Did I miss anything or the other folks in our group?
I think you did a great job, Peggy. See?
Thanks, everybody. I want to just open it up to see if folks have observations, reflections more generally, things you're hearing or not hearing. And at some point, I do want to go to the city too, and maybe Grace to just hear what you're hearing and reflections in terms of what this says to you. But anyone else first? Anna, go ahead.
From a C&D perspective, in different cities where they've rushed the C&D policy and then it's failed, like Palo Alto and Milwaukee are two examples where they rushed it and they didn't have, one reason that it was a failure is they didn't have a strong grassroots movement of people that really wanted to see the policy work. In Portland, they had people chaining themselves to historic buildings. And so I don't completely see a huge grassroots movement in Denver. I think there's pieces of it. But because of that, to not set ourselves up for failure, I think we really need to emphasize the education and awareness piece and really getting contractors on board and getting homeowners educated and aware of, you can donate t-shirts, you can also donate doors, windows, and appliances, and here's the resources. So whatever we can do to help increase the grassroots part of the Denver community would be great.
Really helpful. Other comments? Part of what you're doing here is you all are taking our initial discussion last month and the ordinance as it's written, and you're giving some direction to the work groups and to the city to help start coming up with potential options to run by you all at upcoming meetings. So you're starting to sort of give increasing amounts of guidance through this kind of conversation. Rose, I see your hand is up, and Jill.
Just something to keep in mind that, as we have this discussion that was raised regarding like the will of the voters. It was brought up that like, not all of the voters were fully, aware of all the constraints and ramifications or fully educated on what they voted on, and just how is that incorporated as we move forward.
And the education and awareness piece, as well as the policy piece. Jill.
Yeah, I was just going to add on the C&D side, I'd be curious to hear from, the contracting folks that are on, but my guess is a lot of the larger projects do a good part of that work already. And it's the smaller ones, maybe who don't. And so, it'd be interesting to think through, similar to how there's phased timelines for other components of the ordinance. Are there phased timelines for C&D components as well, based on sort of project size? So that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
And some of these comments actually will segue us in a minute here into work groups, because we are proposing that there be a C&D work group. There are a couple, other work groups for other discrete sectors and categories. So I think some of these will be perfect kind of marching orders, questions, tasks for those work groups to chew on and propose some things to come back to the task force with for consideration. Other high-level comments?
I just wanted to add to, I know Ian was in our group, and so on behalf of petitioners, right, there is a sense that, right, we don't want to open it up so much that it looks totally different to the voters than what they voted on. And I think, that sounded like a really strong value. And so one thing that our group definitely reiterated, and I think probably wanted to carry to the larger group, is that, the outer bounds of, all options still require 100% participation within a set timeline. And those are that's a non-negotiable boundary. And then, I think within the work groups, there may be a closer boundary that we can talk about and where everyone feels comfortable, but that seemed to be the absolute edge of the boundary for the group. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thanks, Erica. That's really helpful. And Stephen, your hand just went up.
The thing that I was going to Erica made me stop and think that maybe part of this might be, and I'm sure there's got to be a way we could do this very affordably. But maybe because it did create, since this was something that was passed by the voters, maybe there's something that we need to start doing right now that's showing what is already being done. Like, could there be some high school kids or college kids or something that, take on a project to go around and start showing some little shorts that can be used in social media about things that are already happening around Denver that are happening within the space. So it kind of gets people, it sees that it's happening, we're talking about it, and that it's not something that's just kind of been pushed aside for now, so that they kind of see something. So.
And one theme that was really, I think, heard loud and clear in the first meeting and again today was this idea of emphasizing the why early on, including the end market piece. And you all talked about that again today. And I just wonder if that ties into some of what you just said, Stephen. Okay, I see Christy, and then Chris's hands are up.
Yeah, another thought, also knock on to Erica's comments and a little bit what Stephen was saying. Something, and I hope this is high level enough for this discussion, but something that's kind of bubbling up is phasing in requirements to, say, haulers, for all of us to be required to act in a similar fashion. It would be a way to sort of potentially spread the costs across the private entities that are actually doing the hauling. I'm thinking for instance, we have to renew our hauling license in the city and county of Denver and all the cities and counties that we work in on a yearly basis. It could be something that's perhaps worked into our hauling license that requires all haulers who are picking up compost, recycling, trash, et cetera, to comply with these universal signage standards, with these, offerings to buildings of certain sizes as they're phased in over the course of the mandate. In effect, taking some of that pressure off of the generators and off of, potentially taxpayers, council people, whatever it might be, the general public, and spreading that among the haulers. Again, as a small hauler who is in this game because we care about waste diversion, these are things we already do. I would love to see Waste Management Republic, et cetera. Anyone else who's getting into the compost hauling game, do that as well. Provide signage, provide training, provide the correctly sized bins and appropriate service levels. So just another thought of how kind of the phasing could happen. I'm sorry, Anna, that I'm not speaking to C&D, but in terms of ongoing collection for recycling and composting, maybe it's a phased in requirement that's passed on to the private entities doing the hauling.
That's great. Thanks, Christy. Chris.
As Stephen talked to your point, we talked about that in our group and had buy-in, recognizing that especially when you talk about large apartment buildings and restaurants, there already are participants in these industries. And then going in and surveying or polling within our groups, we might find who is already implementing these best practices. And then lastly, celebrating them and highlighting these businesses that have taken this on, because it becomes instructive to others who might want to implement as well. Instructive also to what current costs are. So I just wanted to reinforce what you just brought. We came to a strong consensus on that in our group, very specific to that.
Thank you. That's really useful to hear. Okay, well, these conversations are really helpful, and they do lead us into our next conversation about what do we do with this guidance, and how do we hope that work groups will then take this to the next level. So before we do, I'm wondering, Grace, is there anything, I mean, there were just a number of very consistent, I think, messages. Are there knowing that this is all going to be written up, we're going to provide this in a written summary, and then, the work groups will be able to act on it. Do you want to say anything about what you're hearing from the city side?
Well, first off, I mean, I'm consistently impressed with everybody who's here. I was able to sit in on 2 of the groups, and I mean, everyone's putting really deep thought into this, and they're bringing the perspective of not just themselves, but their industry or sector colleagues as well. I think it'll be very helpful when we, the staff people, get all those notes together and start grouping them, right, by the common themes. And I think there's obviously a lot more detail to get into, but I feel like this so far has been very productive in getting us further down that road that we need to have, or that we need to be on to have that deep conversation to actually get to what are the suggested recommendations that this group has.
Okay, thank you. And any other city staff who are sitting in on small groups want to make any observations other than the folks we heard from? Okay.
We heard,
oh yeah,
sorry,
go ahead. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention, actually, we heard an idea for a future presentation to be from kind of like the operations perspective. We heard from the policy side from Blake earlier, and then maybe we could get something from ops haulers on, fines, implementation costs, things, that affect their world.
And was that specific to haulers, Jessica, or was that?
I think so. If speak up, anyone in my group who wanted to expand on their own idea.
I can expand on that a little bit. I mean, I think we've been talking a lot about who, generators, haulers, construction sectors, and when, in terms of the timeline and how it rolls out and the phasing and the runway that it needs. And it's really easy for us to say, we need a robust education program, but we're not really saying how we're doing that. And I think that, the presentation we had on other cities could get deeper into, well, how do they operate it? How many staff do they have? And I assume that this could be part of our recommendations to City Council to say there needs to be a robust program around not just enforcement of this, but also the education and the training. And so kind of digging deeper into the how is this going to be rolled out and what recommendations do we have on that?
Okay, now I understand better. So they had that policy. How did they do it? Kind of next steps.
Yeah, and it'll be helpful to get input from all of you about what of those types of presentations and discussions happen in the full task force, knowing that, we have a discrete number of meetings left, and what is really helpful to have in a smaller group of those who are directly affected in certain ways through work groups. So let's come back to that, because I think it's a really helpful, it's a good suggestion, and we'll just have to figure out how to do these things in the most effective way. So I think unless anyone has any other final comments about that discussion, we'll segue to work groups and what happens next. Okay.
Quick comment, maybe.
Yeah.
Just for everyone, if you haven't toured A1 Organics, the Dad's Landfill, any of the MRFs, do it, because that's so informative to everything that we're doing. It completes well, it doesn't fully complete the circle, but it gives you a much better understanding of these processes. And I think that the city's waste extravaganza tours are one of the most effective education tools.
Hey,
So,
Brian, we're going to talk about that again at the end, that we are going to organize or offer tours through this.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for the plug. Okay, so Sophia, do you mind sharing the PowerPoint again, and we'll launch into work groups here. Thank you. So we talked at the last meeting in March about the idea of using work groups in between task force meetings to help advance conversations in productive ways. So, the general idea is there are going to be specific topics that are more in the weeds, may need to be part of the recommendations, but not necessarily everyone needs to sit through. There's some of you who have just more nuanced and specific expertise to weigh in on. So we want to give a forum to be able to do that, for you all to be able to discuss issues and sort of geek out on certain things, and then vet options, come back to the task force with ideas for consideration. We are thinking that ideally these groups would be, not more than 8 or even 10 people or fewer, just to make them, easy to schedule and easy for people to really dig in. They will not have any decision-making authority, so all options will come back to this whole task force. And some, like Grace said at the beginning, some will meet maybe once, some may meet several times. We're thinking most may meet a couple times. Some work groups may have a person or two they think would be really useful to invite to a conversation, and you're welcome to do that. And so we had some ideas to start with, and we can always add. So that's a little bit of a preamble. And then in terms of this proposed list that we'll share for you all made a bunch of suggestions at and after the last meeting in March. And we talked to staff about specific topics that they really, as the people who are going to be drafting the rules and regs and text changes, think would be really useful to help clarify certain things with them. And then we talked to, so Marguerite, Luis, and Ian, thank you so much, agreed to be part of an agenda design group, and we ran some ideas by them prior to today, in addition to the overall agenda. Thanks again to you all. So here's what we're thinking. And Erica, you did some thinking on this too. So I think maybe in a minute here, I'll have you help walk through what the proposal is. But so licensees and event holders, apartments, office buildings, C&D, including operators, hauling and process operators, processing facilities. Definitely want a work group on signage, education, and comms, and definitely a work group on equity. Those seem important. And some of these groups would need to meet sooner than later, which we'll talk about in a second. And some of these groups, there will be like haulers we may need some of you to sort of, there are only a few of you, but we may need you to spread out a little bit too, or participate in a couple. So we're going to walk through each of these really quickly to give you a sense of what we're thinking. Then we're going to hear from, if there's anything crucial we're missing, and then we're going to give you a chance to actually sign up or indicate preliminary interest if you're not positive. So you can go to the next slide, Sophia. And Erica, do you want to walk through just some initial thoughts about each one of these?
Sure. And actually, Sophia, if you want to go back a slide just real quick, then we can go through the individual slides faster. So I'll throw out some, because I'm a nerd, I'm going to throw out some ordinance sections in case any of you all are nerds as well. So what we were thinking is that there's some specific groups that, you know, are called out in the ordinance sections. And so 1, 2, and 3 work groups, those are kind of geared toward those operator-based requirements in the ordinance, right? And so it felt natural to group them together. For 4 and 5, like Ryan mentioned, those are more topic-based, and there is one section of the ordinance that covers, you know, education, but obviously there are some other tidbits sprinkled throughout that could be incorporated as well. So for licensees and event holders, I mean, these are just general names, right? These are kind of the folks that are covered in section 132D, E, and 138A of the ordinance. So if you're one of those compostable waste producers or you're a permitted event, this group will really be thinking about some questions based on that perspective. For group number 2, apartments and office buildings, that's a really broad, you know, title, but we're thinking about, right, the folks who are covered in 132A and 132B. So if you're in any of those sections, right, that would be the apartments and office buildings. And then for C and D and the other operators, right, those are folks that are called out kind of in 48-139, although it's less, you know, operator based, but again, no need to know all of that off the top of your head. It's just, if there are any other nerds out there who are like, I'm in this section applies to me, that's kind of how we were thinking about it. So for those 3 groups, right, some of the questions that we would be thinking about, and obviously informed by the large task force directions that you guys want to go in, thinking about, you know, the ballot initiative states that, you know, there's responsible parties, and like, you know, some of the things that I think our small group talked about in option B, right, are putting clear definitions either in the ordinance or in rule and reg about, you know, who entirely is responsible. I know there was a little bit of discussion in the first meeting about who's responsible for what part, right? And so just adding a little bit of clarification there might be something, you know, those kinds of recommendation options would be discussed in those work groups. I think another big piece that those 3 groups could talk about are, you know, exactly who's responsible for what and who should bear responsibility, but also how to incentivize compliance, right? Compliance is going to look different for each of those 3 groups. And the incentives are going to be different, right? Because you're serving different populations. If you're a food truck, if you're a pop-up event, if you're a brick and mortar restaurant, you've got a lot in common when it comes to incentivizing compliance and where the line is between, you know, incentivizing people and being overly punitive. And so, you know, those are kind of questions that the groups will talk about too. Moving to the topic-based work groups, the first one will be, I believe, communications and signage is next on our little slide deck. Or sorry, no, maybe. Sorry, it's equity. Sorry, Sophia, I'm making you run all over the place. So, you know, this was an important value for everyone that we heard last time. And so at the city, as someone who does policy, right, anytime we look to amend an ordinance, we've got a set of questions that we ask. We call that our equity lens, right? Who does this harm? Who does this help? Who does this benefit? What are the unintended consequences? Who's missing from the conversation? Those are the types of questions. But this group may have specific equity questions that should be considered in light of the subject matter. So this committee would kind of talk about what are those, you know, assessment questions to ensure that we're taking an equity lens in all of the recommendations that the group discusses, right? What are the group norms that deal with equity that really should be highlighted? So that would be its own work group, and that one would probably meet soonest just to get that conversation started so that the rest of the group can use that equity lens in their discussions. And then we'll get to, you know, obviously the signage and communication. That's again in 139, but we heard a ton of really specific and great ideas in our breakout groups last time. And so this was definitely an area where you know, people have a lot of great ideas about universal symbols, ensuring consistent messaging. We even heard some of that today, and how that communication differs between, again, those different people that you're serving, customers, residents, tenants, personnel, and then all of the different entities that you're working with. So having a group that probably will meet more than once to talk about these things will really allow for the most robust set of recommendations from the task force. I'll kick it back over to you, Ryan.
Okay, Perfect. So before we put in the chat the link for you all to go ahead and indicate your interest in participating in the different work groups, we're just wondering if anyone is seeing anything crucial that's missing for now. And I will say that one big question we had is, does there need to be, or should there be, an organics compost work group? And those, you know, in the end, the thought was, well, those questions weave themselves into many of these other work groups. And, you know, it's sort of it's an overarching theme and part of the ordinance. So, but I think for those of you who may, if you want it, it's something that could easily be set up if it's useful to then bring recommendations back to the task force for consideration. So does anyone have things that you think are missing from what you just heard? Missing work groups or missing topics? Yeah.
There's a question in the chat, Ryan.
Okay, please go ahead. Do you want to raise it?
Yeah, Renee wrote, our group today talked about working on definitions. Would that be throughout all of these work groups or potentially another work group?
I mean, I'd be great to hear from all of you based on what you just heard. My sense is they probably could be tackled most effectively in each work group as they pertain to that work group. But there may be gaps. And if there are gaps, then that would need to be covered somehow.
Yeah, I think both Erica and I commented that yes, where it makes sense for the work groups to talk about the definitions, because some of them are in the,
Right.
you know, there's some in the ordinance, and it is very common for municipal ordinances to include an upfront section on definitions.
Yeah.
Now, if that's distracting to your to the rest of your conversation, I don't think we need you to focus on it, but certainly it is on the table for you to talk about.
Thanks. Van.
I do think that the work group number 3, I think that was haulers and processors. It does seem a little bit big. Like that's a really big work group. It might be wise to break it up into haulers and then processors. I mean, I think it's fine. I think you're right that like a lot of this is intersectional. So having the hauling and processing kind of operations, as it were, like in one might be smart. It's just, it is a big work group, and there'll be a lot of work involved. And I mean, a lot of us will be coming from the organic side and hearing a lot about the C&D, which will be illuminating. Yeah, pretty big.
I'll let Erica has some thoughts about that. I was going to respond to probably a similar way. Go ahead, Erica.
Probably. I forgot to mention it, but yeah, I think for the haulers, right, there's also some opportunity for folks to, you know, not just in the third group, but in the first group as well, because there are some haulers who, you know, very specifically service permitted events, or they service, you know, brick and mortar restaurants. And so depending on the type of waste hauler, you know, or processor, even that first group may be more attractive, or you may have more pertinent information. So just want to make sure everyone knew that it wasn't, you know, exclusive. You're welcome to join multiple groups or whichever one is most relevant to you.
And that third group, the proposal was to have it focus on C&D. So C&D operators, hauling and processing facilities. With a focus on C&D. I think am I? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay, Clinton, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so just to clarify what you just said, is the C&D part of the haulers and processors group as well? So they're in 2 groups? Is that what you just said?
No, so C&D is its own group. That's number 3 is C&D. It's just meant to include all the different entities that are related to C&D. So we're not proposing a group for the other types of haulers, right? For recycling and composting haulers. I think our interest is in having those haulers attend the other groups as they see fit. So as it was just mentioned, you know, these other haulers service the types of entities that are being held responsible according to the ordinance. And, you know, just one thing that comes to mind is this idea of space, right? So I think the haulers will have a lot to say to say the apartments and office buildings about what solutions they might see to the space issue. So that I think that's the idea behind having haulers go between different groups rather than having just one meeting for haulers, as opposed to C&D, which is really quite specific.
Clinton, does that get to your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Sure. So Sophia, would you be willing to post the link in the chat to this sign up sheet? And basically this sign up sheet reiterates what you just saw on each of those slides. So it reiterates what those 5 groups are, what we see as their function and role, and then it gives you a space to actually sign up. And you'll see that I think we have, I don't know, 6 or 7, or I don't know, we have some number of rows. You're welcome to add, like if there's more of you that want to participate, just add a row or add a couple rows for yourself. And so I think what we'll do is we'll just take a couple minutes now, let you all peruse the document, put your name where you want it. We'll, keep our audio on in case you all want to ask questions or talk about anything as you look at it. Yeah, Renee.
It's coming up unauthorized error 401. I don't know if anybody else is getting that or if that's just me.
Yeah, I'm getting that too.
I'm in just fine.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, let's look at the sharing. We'll go and look at the sharing to permissions to see if there's if that's the issue.
I was just going to add that I will, I can reply all to this meeting hold with that link just right now, because there's a couple of people who are on their phones or in their car, and so they can't do that right now. So I just want to make sure they get it quickly rather than waiting for a meeting summary to come out, early next week. So I'll do that right now.
Thank you. Okay. In the meantime, are there more than like 2 of you who are getting that error, or lots of you getting it?
Well, I just tried it again and this time it worked. But the first 2 times I did it, it had the error message.
Okay, so keep trying if it's not working.
I got the error as well.
Okay. All right. So hang tight. We will try to fix it here. In the meantime, be thinking here. I can put back on this, or actually, yeah, let me put back on the screen. The link, the slide with each of the work groups. Actually, Sophia, do you mind doing that when you get a chance? Thank you. Okay, so if you're not able to get into the document, just think about which one you might be interested in, and we're still trying to fix the sharings. And we'll give you all a couple more minutes just to sign up and look at the document. The other thing is, let's see, if you're getting the error message still, can you put your name in the chat so we can just check the sharing settings for you?
A quick question, to go back to like the maybe compost specific. I am getting a little bit confused. Like when, Clinton and I presented earlier about the composting, we talked a lot about infrastructure, processing capacity in markets. Are these work groups we expecting to be, these are the set work groups for the duration of the Waste No More task force? Because if so, I feel like, again, if we were focused on processing capacity and in-market development as sort of major focuses for Waste No More and what we'll present to City Council, I kind of do feel like I'm struggling to understand where those elements are going to be fitting into these work groups.
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
Can I try that?
I was going to ask you. Yeah, please.
Hi, Van. I think, as I've mentioned before, when it comes to the recommendations from this task force, you can make recommendations that are actions that you think Denver should take that are not specific to the ordinance. So for example, you will make recommendations on financial incentives or technical assistance that the city ought to provide, but that's not part of the ordinance, right? And so I think that what you're talking about falls into that same category. So like the city of Denver cannot alone, change the regional infrastructure to create an optimal environment for compost, compost recycling or composting processing. but you can make a recommendation about what role you think the city should play in that. And then so again, it's not part of the ordinance, but it's still recommendations for us. And I'm going to go back to the Climate Action Task Force recommendations. There are some recommendations for those. This is a group that was very similar to this. It was in 2020. It produced a report that was 100 and some pages long. It wasn't related to an ordinance. It was really like a charge for what Denver needs to do to improve its work in the climate action space. It had a lot of recommendations. Some of them were things that we, at least our new agency, didn't have complete control over. It's still on the list of things for us to do. And so we are working on those with our colleagues over time. And I think what you're talking about falls in that same category.
Okay. I just like, yeah, I don't know. I just have a tough time understanding how Waste No More is going to be successfully implemented without including like a lot of focus in developing the some of these recommendations like in a work group. But we could chat offline, and I mean, I think these work groups are still really great. Yeah, I'll definitely want to sign up for this.
There's that. And don't forget, we do have a whole meeting I think it's our June meeting, is split between discussions on equity and discussions about supports. And so as Ryan mentioned, by then, maybe one or two of these work groups we're talking about now will not need to meet again. And so we can start another work group specific to that, because we only have 26 people. You guys can only split yourselves, between so many work groups. And since they don't all need to meet for the next, every other week for the next 5 months, we should have space to fold one, sunset one and open another.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you, Grace.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for posing the question. That was one of the things we were chewing on as well. All right, those of you who are having trouble, hopefully some of you are able to get into the document now. We just resent you access, but it is one of those issues with Google Docs. So you do need to use whatever email address you use to access Google Docs. And if it's not working for you because of the whole Google thing, just let us know and we'll get it to you afterwards. Van, there's also a message from Jessica in the chat to you. I don't know if you saw it. Perhaps there are enough groups outside the task force working on that effort that you mentioned. And if there's a need to reignite the effort. Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know which.
Okay,
Jessica.
I'll chat with you separately. It's okay. We don't need to do it here.
Okay. All right. So I think, so first of all, any questions, comments, thoughts now that you've seen the document? I'm going to look in a second. But it seems like I'm not seeing signups. Am I missing this? Sophia, are you on the document?
Yeah, I'll share the link again on the chat.
So did anyone actually sign up? And I'm just not seeing your name yet show up?
Yes, yeah, I'm seeing signups.
Okay, I must have a lag. All right, perfect. It's great. Sophia sent the link. And so it looks like, okay, perfect. Now I do. It looks like we have a few people for licensees and event holders. Great. Several people for apartment buildings and office buildings. Several for C&D with a good smattering.
So Ryan, you said we could sign up for these afterwards, right? Since those that have gone mobile.
Yeah, those who've gone mobile can do it afterwards. What we're asking is if you would please sign up, even if you're not positive, but if you're interested by like mid-afternoon tomorrow, say 3 o'clock tomorrow, Friday, so that we and city staff can reach out to you to start setting up meetings for those work groups that need to meet well before the next meeting. Renee is going to ask Sonia. Thank you, Renee. Yeah. And so just do it before tomorrow, if you would, at 3, and then expect to hear from city staff. And there will be staff assigned to each of these work groups who will work with you to set agendas and schedule meetings and make sure then we'll work together to integrate your thoughts and recommendations to the task force back into the upcoming meetings. That is great. So there are people who have signed up, a little critical mass for each one, and that's exactly what we were hoping. So we'll expect that some of you may add your names before tomorrow at 3. And Renee, thanks for entering some additional names while you're at it. Okay, any other final comments on work groups before we share the screen in terms of our next steps and what to expect for May? Okay, great. Sophia, I think, do you mind sharing the screen one last time? I think we had just a couple of final thoughts for before the next meeting. If someone could add Chris Berry to communication and signage, that'd be great as well. Okay, Grace, do you want to talk about what happens between now and May and at the May meeting?
Yes. Okay. So here's first the good news. If you're familiar with the Regional Air Quality Council or the Metro Chamber of Commerce building on Market Street, that's where we're going to have our next in-person meeting. But we will have a Zoom option available. And Taylor will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the link that you received for this meeting will work for that one, for those who can't attend in person. They've got a good room that will seat all of us, which is one of the big challenge number 1. But big challenge number 2 is it's a room that actually has high quality tech so that the people who are participating remotely plus the public will still be able to hear all of us, which is the biggest challenge that we have with our city rooms that seat that many people. The audio just isn't good enough to do remote. So I think I got this. Ryan, I hope I got this right. The May meeting is equity and supports. I wonder if I got that wrong.
No, I think you're right.
I did get that right. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Then I got it wrong earlier when I said it was June. So we'll be working on that. But I think Ryan will obviously hopefully have time for the report outs from the work groups that have been meeting, that are meeting in the meantime. So we'll definitely include that as well.
Absolutely.
All right. So
we'll use the equity work group to help us think about what needs to happen at that meeting. So equity work group will be hoping to meet with you soon.
Yes. And just a note on that, next week, Ryan and I are meeting with representatives from our Office of Social Equity and Innovation to bring them into this fold as well and get their guidance. And in case anybody didn't notice, I believe it's in our resources folder in the Google Drive, I did drop in the recommendations template from our Sustainability Advisory Council. And that just is a basic outline of how that group makes recommendations and how they bring their equity lens to their conversation. It's not to say that that's exactly how this group should do it, but at least it's a template that can be a helpful resource. So on the homework, Ryan already mentioned, please sign up for those work groups by 3 o'clock tomorrow. And if you do continue to have any problems getting in, just email us back and we'll get that worked out. And then those of us on staff who are responsible for each of those work groups, we're going to be probably sending you doodle polls to get those scheduled. So please keep an eye out for those. And then I believe Greg is going to send invitations for the DADS landfill tours. And then I will work with A1 and Compost Colorado and Waste Management to see what we might be able to do to schedule optional tours for their facilities as well.
Hey, Grace, if I could add on the invites, I'm going to send those out tomorrow. Again, there will be 2 options, the 14th or the 21st. You only need to attend one. The easiest thing to do is just going to be reply to the email for the date you want, and I will compile it. And I will get the final details out to you all by next Tuesday afternoon in advance. And if you need transportation, please indicate that from a central location in Denver, for instance, and I'll arrange that. Otherwise, I will provide instructions for what to do to get out there.
Thanks, Greg. And Erwin just put a note in the chat asking folks to reach out to him for a tour of the Waste Management MRF. And Erwin, I'm wondering, would you be, I know you're sick today, and I'm sorry, but when you're better, would you mind sending an email to this group, just replying to one of Grace's recent emails and just asking people to email you if they're interested, since some people aren't here or may have left the meeting? Would that work?
Yeah, that'll work.
Thank you.
Hey, Ryan, I don't know if you saw in the chat, May 4th is Waste Expo. Are we going to be missing some folks?
Oh,
Yeah, I set those meeting dates back when I first made the application in December. And I guess obviously I wasn't aware of that, but it's a little hard to find another date for 50 people. So it would be good to know who we will be missing that day. And don't forget, you can send a proxy. So maybe perhaps reach out to me if you cannot attend, and we'll figure out how to make sure you're represented.
It would be really helpful to hear from all of you who know for sure you're not able to attend. And if there's a big group of you, I think we'll just have to talk about that and what to do.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zoom hybrid option, that means it's okay to attend via Zoom.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
that's fine.
Thanks. Okay, everybody. Well, it's 5 on the nose, and really, really, really grateful for all of you who made this possible. So many of you had a hand in today's meeting, and including those of you who just were here with your great thoughts and participation. So just huge gratitude. I don't know if anyone wants to come off mute and say goodbye, but it's nice to see everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
I think it's
Thanks,
always great. We
everybody.
had a 3-hour meeting, got everything done. So good job.
Yeah,
Thank you.
big shout out to the presenters for doing a great job. Thank you all.
Huge.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.